Among the many psychological types Carl Gustav Jung described, one stands out not just for its rarity, but for the profound psychic intricacy it embodies, the introverted intuitive. According to Jung, this personality type is among the most difficult to grasp by others and even by the individual themselves. It is not drawn to the external world of facts, action, or observable emotion. Instead, it operates within a symbolic stream rising from the unconscious, navigating through inner images, archetypal visions, and premonitions that escape ordinary perception. This type does not follow linear reasoning or empirical observation. Its internal compass points inward. It senses meanings still unformed, perceives inner shifts before they reach awareness, and is tuned to the unseen. The physical world, with its logic, routines, and practicality, often feels shallow or unimportant to them. This isn't due to arrogance or indifference, but because their awareness is drawn to another realm, a symbolic dimension that often anticipates what is yet to be. For the introverted intuitive, facts are echoes of something more fundamental, something still in gestation. Jung described this type as someone who perceives what is about to exist before it takes shape. Their orientation is toward potential, toward the psychic unfolding, the patterns forming in the collective unconscious. Such attunement makes them highly sensitive to cultural, spiritual, and existential shifts before they surface in the external world. Yet, this sensitivity carries a price. The world around them does not function on the same wavelength. Society asks for evidence, outcomes, tangible proof. But what this type detects is by nature intangible, at least in its early stages. This disconnect creates a deep chasm between their inner knowing and what the world demands. Often their insights are dismissed, mocked, or misunderstood. They may intuit something essential about a person upon meeting them. They may feel the air rupture before conflict arises, or sense endings long before confirmation. But whenever they try to communicate these perceptions, they are met with silence or rejection. Over time, they learn to remain quiet, keeping their inner world concealed, silent, and impenetrable. And it is within this silence that the real danger takes root. Jung issued a clear warning: when the introverted intuitive fails to express their visions through words, images, or action, those very visions may begin to consume them. The inner world, once a place of revelation, becomes a cage. When symbols remain unintegrated, they gain autonomy, dominating the psyche from within. The individual shifts from being a contemplator of images to being possessed by them. This is where Jung's dark caution takes form. The gift of deep intuition, if unbalanced, can lead to dissociation. In this video, we'll explore the nature of this path, how this personality functions, the dangers it faces, and most importantly, the transformational power it holds when it succeeds in expressing and integrating its inner vision. The journey of the introverted intuitive is not an easy one, but it is deeply meaningful. It is a passage between worlds, and understanding this crossing may illuminate not only those who walk it, but those who seek to understand the deeper mysteries of the human psyche. Within Jung's framework, intuition is classified as one of the irrational functions, a form of perception that does not rely on logic or sensory input. In the case of the introverted intuitive, this function turns inward, reaching into the depths of the unconscious. Unlike extroverted intuition, which scans for emerging patterns in the external environment, introverted intuition dives inward, touching symbolic content, archaic imagery, and messages from the soul's shadows. It perceives not what is visible, but what stirs beneath awareness, surfacing without context or warning. Jung likened this function to the ability to apprehend raw psychic imagery, forms not yet processed into thought, emotion, or behavior. The introverted intuitive lives in close contact with these inner images. They do not see with their physical eyes, but through the eyes of the soul. What appears ordinary to others may be charged with hidden meaning, silent tensions, and repeating psychic structures for them. Their mind acts like a receiver, tuned to internal signals with no verbal language, but with weight, form, and psychic force. When channeled correctly, this sensitivity becomes a wellspring of insight. The introverted intuitive can perceive the core of an experience, discern the unconscious drives behind others' actions, and foresee transformation before it becomes visible. But this same sensitivity can leave them ungrounded. Because the sensation function, the one responsible for grounding awareness in the body and the present moment, is typically underdeveloped, they can easily drift from objective reality. Intuition begins to operate on its own, detached from the concrete world, leading the person into a sea of unanchored inner visions. This inner architecture isn't chaotic, but neither is it within conscious control. These symbolic images arise from psychic necessity, not willful thought. When understood, they can give rise to stories, insights, and healing. But left unprocessed, they accumulate as psychic static, creating confusion, stalling clarity, and eroding rational function. At that point, the individual stops living in the world and begins living in a self-reinforcing internal theater. Understanding the workings of one's own intuition is the first line of defense for the introverted intuitive. They must learn to distinguish meaningful symbols from delusional constructs. This requires time, solitude, and internal discipline. Yet, there's a trap. No matter how rich the inner world may be, it holds dangers. In the next section, we will explore these risks, the moment when inner symbols, unexpressed, start turning inward, fueling psychic collapse. If this message resonates with you, please consider subscribing. Thank you for your support. Introverted intuition contains a paradoxical quality. Its power lies in what is not yet real. It is oriented toward the future, the latent, the edge of consciousness. The introverted intuitive lives on the threshold between what is and what is emerging. They sense events before they unfold, feel shifts in archetypal energy before they manifest. This ability, Jung suggested, makes them akin to a seer, someone who glimpses what others cannot. But such vision comes with a cost. What is seen cannot be proven, what is felt cannot be explained, and what is intuited rarely meets recognition. This leads to a painful tension between inner certainty and external invalidation. Eventually, the introverted intuitive may begin to doubt their inner voice, or swing in the opposite direction, clinging to their vision with dogmatic certainty and rejecting the world. In either case, the friction between the inner world and the outer denial begins to corrode the psyche. One striking example Jung provided was of a woman in analysis who described a recurring image of a black snake coiled in her abdomen. As the analysis progressed, the snake rose through her body, exited through her mouth, and transformed into a golden-headed serpent. To many this might seem like psychotic imagery, but Jung understood it as a visual expression of inner transformation. The black snake represented repressed psychic content. When integrated, it re-emerged as a symbol of renewal. This illustrates how introverted intuition functions. It speaks in images, not logic. It doesn't trace causality, but destiny. The danger emerges when those images have no outlet, when they are not externalized through expression. The psyche implodes. The mind loses discernment between inspiration and illusion. What once was a channel of wisdom becomes a vortex of delusion. The line between revelation and psychosis is razor thin, and the introverted intuitive walks that line every day. To prevent their intuition from becoming a psychological trap, they must understand the mechanisms that lead to detachment from reality.
In the following section, we'll explore the precise moment when unexpressed inner images begin to overtake the conscious self, leading to archetypal inflation and the fragmentation of identity. By nature, the introverted intuitive tends to live in solitude, not as a preference, but as a structural result of where their attention lies. Their focus is drawn toward what is unseen, what has not yet taken shape, what rises from the unconscious in the form of visions, symbols, and omens. However, when this internal orientation lacks any bridge to the external world, whether through communication, artistic expression, or embodied practice, it creates fertile ground for an identity crisis, and in more extreme cases, delusions of grandeur. Jung termed this process inflatio, a state in which the ego becomes overrun by unconscious content, identifying with archetypes without recognizing its own limits. This phenomenon creeps in slowly. The intuitive introvert, with their attunement to deep symbolic patterns, may begin to believe they have been chosen for a special purpose. While the feeling of uniqueness can initially reflect their sensitivity, it can quickly mutate into a messianic illusion. They start to see themselves as holders of divine truths, misunderstood visionaries, or prophets scorned by an unseeing society. Criticism is reinterpreted as persecution. Others' doubts become signs of inferiority. As isolation deepens, it is no longer a side effect but a justification. They don't understand me because I am more evolved. This type of psychic inflation is perilous, not because of solitude itself, but because it dismantles self-awareness. The person begins to inhabit a symbolic narrative with no anchor in reality. They no longer differentiate between unconscious content and concrete experience. They begin to identify with archetypes, the sage, the martyr, the prophet, at the expense of their ordinary humanity. The result is fragmentation. The intuitive function, once a channel for meaning, becomes a mechanism for escape. Practical life falls away. Relationships lose authenticity. Any challenge is interpreted as an existential threat to the sacred inner vision. Jung observed this pattern in individuals who emotionally withdrew and refused any adaptation to societal reality. The greatest risk, he warned, was not isolation itself, but what followed, the complete takeover of consciousness by the unconscious. When this happens, the ego no longer mediates experience, but becomes a passive container for autonomous images. Perception becomes warped, judgment clouded, and existence turns into a lucid delusion, where everything makes symbolic sense, but nothing remains grounded. Still, not every encounter with a symbol leads to collapse. There is an antidote, and it begins with expression. The act of giving form to the invisible, through art, speech, gesture, or ritual, is what transforms a symbolic prison into a channel of creation. In the next section, we will examine precisely this, how individuals like Kafka, Van Gogh, and Jung himself managed to externalize their visions and transmute their inner landscapes into cultural and psychological revolutions. The psychological survival of the introverted intuitive hinges on this capacity to bring the inner world into the outer one. Jung believed that unexpressed symbols eventually act like foreign objects in the psyche, undigested fragments that disturb the system from within. The only way to integrate these inner contents is to shape them into something external, visible, and shared. Symbolic expression, whether through writing, painting, music, or even sacred ritual, is not a luxury. It is essential to mental health. This act of translation is what distinguishes the fragmented mystic from the creative visionary. When the introverted intuitive gives form to what they perceive inside, they turn isolation into resonance, silence into language, and alienation into connection. What was once a private maze becomes a collective map, and this transformation serves a dual purpose. It not only relieves internal psychic pressure, but also gives others access to unconscious material that would otherwise remain hidden. History is filled with individuals who likely functioned from this typology. Franz Kafka, with his surreal, dreamlike texts, channeled existential disorientation into literature that still exposes the absurdity of modern systems. Vincent van Gogh, unable to function in everyday society, transposed his symbolic turmoil into paintings that burst with emotion and archetypal force, and Jung himself, who recognized this type in his own psyche, devoted his life to translating complex inner experiences into psychological models. Yet, this process is not exclusive to the gifted or the famous. The deeper message is clear: symbolic expression is a bridge. Without it, the inner world folds in on itself, distorting perception and fragmenting the self. With it, the inner image becomes a force of integration, organization, and renewal. Through this expression, the intuitive function stops operating in the dark. It begins working with consciousness. Creativity, then, is not simply talent. It is the architecture of psychological integration. However, even the most profound symbolic expression is not sufficient on its own if it lacks grounding in reality. The introverted intuitive, by structural inclination, tends to neglect the body, routine, and practical limits. This exposes them to new risks. Creative output can become compulsive. Inspiration can become escapism. Real transformation only occurs when the symbol is also anchored in the sensory realm, when intuition is balanced by sensation. In the next section, we will explore this vital balancing act. We will look at how practices rooted in the body and the natural world serve as medicine for the soul, and how they offer the necessary structure to keep the psyche from falling into symbolic fragmentation. If this content is speaking to your experience, you may find real value in my ebook Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's ideas in simple language and offers tools for navigating your own inner world. The link is in the pinned comment. The intuitive function, particularly in its introverted expression, operates outside the bounds of time, linearity, and the physical senses. It moves through the depths of the unconscious, collects symbols and impressions, and surfaces with visions that rarely align with the concrete world. This ability gives the introverted intuitive their mysterious brilliance, but it also presents their greatest vulnerability. Without grounding, without firm anchoring in the present moment, this intuition risks becoming a whirlpool, pulling the individual further from reality. That's why Jung emphasized the importance of developing the inferior function, sensation. Sensation is what connects us to the present. It perceives the tangible, the warmth of sunlight on the skin, the taste of bitter coffee, the weight of a stone in the hand. For the intuitive introvert, who tends to dismiss these inputs as mundane or irrelevant, sensation can feel like a foreign language. Yet it is this very language that provides a counterbalance to abstraction. In the material simplicity of everyday life, walking, cooking, gardening, crafting, maintaining a routine, the intuitive type can find stability. Returning to the body, to presence, to earthly rhythms, does not mean abandoning symbolic depth. Rather, it sustains it. When the introverted intuitive learns to oscillate between inward immersion and outward practice, their insights cease to be disorienting spirals and become rooted forms. This capacity to move between the inner and the outer worlds, to pass between the invisible and the visible, is what marks psychic maturity. The symbol is no longer a passive object of contemplation, but becomes a guiding force that informs actions, decisions, and relationships. Not as prophecy, but as compass. In this light, everyday rituals take on a deeply therapeutic role. They don't have to be esoteric or grand. Lighting a candle in the morning, journaling at night, or simply organizing one's space intentionally. These are small gestures that signal to the unconscious, there is structure, there is embodiment, there is reality. It is in these ritualized acts that the symbol can descend without destabilizing the psyche. The integration of sensation is not a limitation of intuition, it is what allows it to bloom without consuming the individual. But even when symbolic expression and physical grounding are achieved, the introverted intuitive must face one final trial, staying loyal to their inner truth. In a world that dismisses the invisible, modern culture prioritizes what can be measured, proven, and monetized. It values logic, productivity, and external performance. Intuition, depth, and quiet symbolic awareness are not only undervalued, they are often pathologized, ridiculed, or ignored entirely. For the intuitive introvert, this creates a daily tension between living in accordance with the soul and meeting the expectations of society. Each moment presents a choice: betray the inner voice to conform, or remain loyal, even if it means being misunderstood, excluded, or unseen. And this choice is not abstract. It plays out in subtle interactions, in conversations where they must suppress what they truly see, in workplaces where silence is mistaken for weakness, in social spaces where their inner perceptions feel inappropriate or too much. But this tension need not lead to defeat. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself, requires precisely this kind of navigation. To live symbolically in a world obsessed with the literal is not to withdraw, but to walk through life while holding the thread of the soul. It means knowing that your vision may never be validated and still choosing to live by it. The purpose of intuition is not to convince others, win arguments, or impress. It is to guide the soul toward what is becoming. Living symbolically in a materialistic culture is a silent act of resistance. It is choosing depth over convenience, meaning over validation. It is maintaining communion with the invisible, even when the world tells you it has no value. And when the introverted intuitive finds the courage to stand by what they see, feel, and know, they become quietly transformative. Not by preaching or demanding attention, but by simply existing as proof that another layer of reality is always present. One that whispers instead of shouts, one that transforms in silence. This presence alone can inspire, unsettle, and awaken those who are ready to perceive. If you feel that you live in this invisible world, among symbols, intuitions, and silent understandings that few seem to recognize, feel free to share in the comments. How have you navigated this journey? What practices have helped you stay whole? How do you walk the line between inner truth and outer pressure?
Your voice may be the guide someone else is silently searching for. And don't forget to watch the next video. It may be the continuation of this reflection and hold the key that helps you dive even deeper. See you there.